So you went to the toilet then, you
did, yeah. Somebody's still in there.
Hey! Do you have got black light?
Oh, good. Hello. Hello. Well, rowdy members of the audience.
Hi, Amy.
Hello. It's okay to have.
Right, last one's coming out, I think. Right then. Well, welcome to Leeds Chat, the Friday crowd. But by the way, we're not doing this anymore. We're sticking with Thursdays. This was like
Friday's just too exhausting. Yeah, ready to go to bed.
even I forgot that it was on a Friday, and I scheduled it. Welcome to Leeds Chat. I'm Matt. I'm a .NET developer.
I'm John, same.
Been doing this for about 6 years now. Got a good talk lined up today. But before we get on to the talk, I want to mention that Fruition, Rob,
Hello,
is
yeah. I'll be there.
one of our sponsors.
I'm here on a Friday night.
If you want to talk to him later.
Rob pays for the beer. He'll be happy to buy you a beer, or I'll buy you a beer on his behalf at the pub afterwards. If you want an informal chat there.
Well, Rob actually can't stay for the...
I'm here till 8 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
Got a bit of industry news. The biggest news this month is...
Well, AWS joined the .NET Foundation.
No, Kevin Smith getting becoming MVP, Microsoft MVP. It's Kevin Smith, right?
Yeah.
So Kevin, he's a regular lead sharp.
So now we have a benchmark. If you want to become MVP, you have to run 2 meetups in 2 different cities, 100 miles from each other. You have to travel the country from East Anglia to Cambridge and Reading, and you have to come to Leeds and pretty much any .NET event. So if that's how you measure your yardstick, then you too can become an MVP.
Kevin, of course, is organiser of .NET Sheffield, but he comes to Leeds.
And .NET York.
And .NET York.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. I mean, he definitely deserves to be an MVP, doesn't he? I wonder who died for him to get secondly, Joe Swan, good friend of ours, runs Hack Manchester. He's been running it for a good few years. Really good event. If you're into hackathons, I went to one. It's hard work, but it's really, really good.
It's really big as well. I mean, apparently their beer budget is £40,000.
Yes.
It's incredibly huge, and they go all night, and it's in the GMEX or something like that.
Yeah, no, it's in the Science Museum.
Oh, right.
The Manchester Science Museum. Or it was when I went. Maybe they moved it. They've started doing a kids version of it as well, which Joe was saying that the kids are absolutely amazing what they come up with. So if you're a company or you work for a company who fancies sponsoring them, because there are groups that go there for the hackathon that sort of represent the company, so maybe Blacklight could even go there. But they're really struggling this year with sponsors, so thought I'd just give them a mention, just in case you fancy sponsoring them. As good exposure, and yeah, you get, I suppose you find good, it's advertising and
good networking.
Good networking, and maybe even people to hire. Of course, .NET Core 3 finally released this week. No more upgrading previews and your project breaks. Is anyone doing a .NET Core 3
Well,
project?
I attempted to today in an Azure function, but you've heard about that, and that's why my day was so bad.
Yeah.
So we won't talk about
Well, I've got a side project that I decided I'm going to do on .NET Core 3, and every time I open it up, there's a new preview, and then I have to install it, and then everything breaks, and you know, it's like a half an hour before I even get to coding the project. So I'm quite happy that it's now integrated into Visual Studio. So all you have to do is
just wait till you get to try and build and deploy it as well. It's a whole world of fun.
you put this on AWS joins
Yeah,
the
so
.NET
the
Foundation?
most important cloud provider in the world has given a vote of confidence to .NET by joining the .NET Foundation. They want to be part of .NET and want to drive its future and see where it goes. So that's a good compliment to .NET and the future of it. So pretty good.
Yeah. So just wanted to mention, there's an article that I read on holiday on Medium that's caused a bit of a stir in our tech hub, and it was called Object-Oriented Programming, OOP, the $1 trillion disaster, and it was all about, you might guess, functional programming. Yeah, it's a really long article, so if you find some time reading it. I personally, I knew I wanted to get into functional programming, but I always thought the guys that were giving the talks were sort of like on, you know, like they appeared like they've sort of graduated to Jedi Master. They were always banging on about how they can do the game of life in a tweet or something.
They
like
probably did Haskell at university, unlike me, that did chemical engineering. You know,
Right, there you go.
Different approach.
However, after reading that article, the penny dropped. Is that how you say it? The penny dropped, and you know, really made me look into functional programming a bit more, because it was saying that it's time to move on from object-oriented programming, which is a big statement.
But you could do both at the same time.
I know, but there's quotes from the guy who invented object-oriented programming. He said he never intended it to turn into something that, you know, C# or Java is today. I think the closest is Erlang.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Anyway.
Scala, they usually put that one as
No, that's functional, isn't it? But anyway, there was a language that's true object-oriented. Anyway, it's a good read. I recommend it. And if you fancy getting into functional programming, I personally want to see a few more functional F# talks next year. On to Kaizen bits is like our section that maybe you know, makes you a better developer. It's sort of like just a bit of interesting stuff. Another article in Medium I came across by coincidence, and it was called 100+ coding interview questions for programmers, which I thought quite interesting. I'm thinking about employing permanent developers next year, and anyway, but if you you know, you could look at it from an employer's point of view or from a developer's point of view. I just thought it was quite interesting to. I personally haven't done many coding interviews. You have, I think. But it's quite interesting that it says that the main thing is basically you need to know about data structures and algorithms.
algorithms.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the main thing in coding interviews, apparently. And then it goes on. It gives you a few resources and tips. Yeah, it's a good article. I won't read anything out, but it lists 100 coding problems. So and what I found particularly interesting, it gives a couple of websites, but one in particular was good, and it was called TripleByte, I think. And apparently the really big companies use TripleByte because it sort of automates the coding interview questions, and then after you've sort of passed that phase, then you get access to then you can talk to companies. So from a company point of view, it's quite a good way of recruiting, I guess.
Something like Codility, that kind of website.
Yeah.
Put links on Meetup for people that have a look.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, that's basically it. I was going to go into productivity tools.
And without further ado,
Yes. Hang on a minute. We'll give a proper introduction. Our speaker today is Dylan Hayes. He works for Blacklight. Blacklight regulars of Leeds, of course. Amy, the winner of our coding game competition last month. Very impressive. SharePoint tech lead at Blacklight Software. Studied at University of Liverpool.
That's correct, yeah. You've read my LinkedIn as well.
Well, I have it here. Well, I'll let you go and do the rest.
Okay,
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My name's Dylan Hayes, as you may have just heard. I work for Blacklight Software, as you may have just heard as well. I typically spend my days looking for HDMI cables. No, I typically spend my days on fairly client-facing stuff, typically involving SharePoint, Office 365, but not exclusively. Sorry, are you coming in? I will just wait for...
can I make a small introduction? I've just got this tweet from our Kevin Smith MVP. Can you mention that John Skeet is coming to his event next Tuesday?
Yes.
I don't know how he managed to get John Skeet, but it's a
He's an MVP now, isn't he?
bit of a coup, and he's in Sheffield next Tuesday at .NET Chef, so...
I must, I would say.
yeah, if you can get along, good.
Okay, right. Anyway, I'm here to talk to you about Cognitive Services, which is part of Azure. As I've said before, my background traditionally was as a .NET developer, and I've sort of morphed away from that into the dark side of consultancy and pre-sales and customer-facing type stuff, but I do vaguely remember how to code, or so I keep telling myself. Anyway, we're going to have a look at Cognitive Services. Now, in the interest of making this demo nice and easy to understand and things, we're actually going to be sticking the data into SharePoint, and we're going to be using Microsoft Flow to do all the plumbing, because my coding skills on stage just really aren't that good. Nobody wants to see me code on stage. So, but there's no reason that you actually necessarily have to use Microsoft Flow and SharePoint as your back end. I've just done that for convenience because it makes a nice, fast flowing demo. So we'll talk about a bit more about the specifics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about the product, what it can do, and how it fits into the overall topic of artificial intelligence. Then we're going to have a whole bunch of demos. And then after that, we're going to try and think about what directions that machine learning and artificial intelligence might be taking into the future. We can sort of break that out into discussion. We're not short on time this evening, I believe, so if people want to stop me for questions, that's pretty good. If we start getting massively sidetracked, I think I'll have to try and bring it back in. But if you do have questions, just make yourself known. Any questions so far? No? Right, so this is Friday night. It's payday night, as somebody has pointed out, so we should actually be having fun. Unfortunately, we're in this room, aren't we? So we're going to try and have some fun all the same. There is beer around, as obviously we've been introduced. Now we're going to have some fun and do a bit more interactivity. So without further ado, if I come to the next slide, when my clicker decides to click. I tested this 5 minutes ago. Right. Or not, as the case may be. Clicking the mouse instead, I've actually got a hashtag. What I'd like you to do is look on your phones for an interesting picture, hopefully work safe. I don't want anything sort of too dodgy. I'd like you to tag a picture, stick it on Twitter with that particular hashtag. And we're going to have a look at it in a bit. Everybody got the hashtag? Pictures of pretty much anything goes, within reason. Nothing that you wouldn't want your boss to see, shall we say, but other than that, anything goes. And I will shout at my clicker, because my clicker is not clicking. Everybody got the hashtag? Dylan's Demo Images.
Dylan's Demo Images.
And hopefully we won't be flooded with bazillions of pictures and suddenly I'll run out of Azure credit. But hey, that's a challenge for you, isn't it? Everybody got that?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I clicking a clicker that doesn't click? Oh, And I've got a random survey for you as well. So you'll see a QR code on the screen. If you can zap that, that will give you a page which gives you a random survey. I'm not asking you to fill that out just yet, but if you get bored of me speaking, give that a go. It's just, I want you to review something random. It doesn't have to be anything. I want you to describe an experience, a film, a restaurant, a plane journey, or a great spiritual awakening, or whatever you like that you've recently had. Lots of words, please. Everybody got that? Yeah? I'm going to move on now. Right, so let's set the scene. AI, it's quite a contentious word, isn't it? It's a word that's been around for a long, long time. When you talk about AI, we all think of science fiction stuff, don't we? We think of Terminator, of course, that's an obvious one, R2-D2, C-3PO, any other malign intelligences out there. It has a certain image with it. Obviously, it's starting to become something a bit more mainstream. It's gone from science fiction into reality. Now, machine learning is a subset of, do you mind if I close the door actually? So
Yeah.
the meeting's open for you. That's better. Machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, what used to be called artificial intelligence 30 years ago, is now commoditized. If you think, those of you who've been in the industry for a while, you think 20, 30 years ago, OCR was super expensive, really hard to do, and a bit crap. Now it's commoditized. If you think about speech recognition even 10 years ago was very, very similar. It was bleeding edge stuff, it didn't really work. Nowadays you can buy devices that feature pretty decent speech recognition for what, 30 quid on Amazon these days? Speech recognition's hit the mainstream. That's all powered by machine learning. I want to emphasize the difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence. Machine learning is Rain Man. Everybody seen the film Rain Man? Mm-hmm. Rain Man, he's autistic. He is very, very good at certain things. He's absolutely shit at everything else. So machine learning is kind of like that, that you have this autistic idiot savant machine that is really, really good at one thing, and it's not good at anything else. That's what you have to remember with machine learning, is sometimes it will give you the illusion that it is actually intelligent. It is not intelligent, it's just bloody good at one task. Not even necessarily bloody good, but it's good at one task. It's made for one task. It is not a general intelligence. Even the lowliest earthworm has more general intelligence than machine learning these days. Now there is another topic of general artificial intelligence. It's been something that's like it's been like fusion, and it's always been 10 years away. Supposedly another 10 years we'll have general intelligence. It hasn't happened yet. Don't know when it's going to happen. Topic for discussion at the end. What we're doing is not general intelligence. It is machine learning to do specific tasks. We're going to be talking about Azure Cognitive Services, which is a bit of a mouthful when you've eaten too much pizza. It's a set of cloud-based services, and each of which, as I remembered, the Rain Man analogy, it's created to perform a particular task, such as extracting text from an image. These services are in the cloud. They came out in the cloud first, but now, thanks to the magic of containers, you can run them yourself. Now, the interesting thing about this is if you choose to run them in a container, you're still paying Microsoft on a consumption basis, even though it's running on your kit. Go figure. But for some particular workloads, that might make sense to you, that if you have data rules that the data can't be hosted in the cloud or it has to stay within your network, you might choose to do that. For most people, running it locally doesn't make sense when you can run it for the same price in the cloud. But it's there if you need it, thanks to the magic of containers. It's not, let's talk about what it's not generally intelligent. I keep saying this, we're going to show it in a minute, how it really isn't generally intelligent. It's pretty damn easy to use. It's not going to take over the world or steal your job just yet, but I think in the future, this stuff is going to change how we do business. Traditionally, automation has been something that's affected people that were manual workers, hasn't it? Automation's come along. The Luddites, very famously around this area, smashed up mills because the mills got machines that took away their jobs. Those of us that have a white-collar occupation, I say that, and I'm not actually in a white collar, but you know what I mean by white collar. Those of us who think for a living have considered ourselves to be immune to the effects of mechanization. Well, I think that's probably going to change. A lot of people who think for a living are possibly going to lose their jobs in future because of machine learning and artificial intelligence and the ability to automate what used to be a task that required thought. button. What services are on offer? Well, we're going to quickly tour some of the services before we go into a demo, but broadly they split into 4 categories. We have stuff to do with images, we have stuff to do with video, we have stuff to do with text, we have stuff to do with decisions, making decisions about data. All of these things have very, very well documented APIs. There's all sorts of additional libraries that are built on top of them. The documentation really is good. I know you guys are more from a .NET background. There's very, very good libraries for .NET. I'm going to be using these things from Flow. Is anybody familiar with Microsoft Flow? No? Okay. Microsoft Flow is basically for people who cheat at programming, like me. Microsoft Flow exists to be able to connect different things within Office. It's kind of for workflows and things like that, but it lets you build, it's kind of like the less grown-up version of Azure Logic apps and things like that. It lets you build cloud-based stuff that connects one thing to another in a fairly easy way. It hasn't necessarily got all the strength of a full application life cycle management and things, but it's a good way. For our demos, it's pretty good because I can show you this stuff, and even though you don't understand Flow, you can see this stuff as easy. In your particular choice of coding language, you can do the same thing. You just have to think how you would translate that into the particular APIs you're calling. The costs are consumption-based. So in other words, the more you use, the more you pay. But there is a free tier that offers you a certain limited set of services. And if you've got an MSDN subscription, Visual Studio Online or whatever, you actually get a tier where you get a bit more consumption for free chucked in. I'm running all these demos off that, so hopefully I haven't run out of credit, but we'll see, because I did the same demo last night. So if it suddenly runs out of credit halfway through, well, that's part of the fun, isn't it? So let's just see. Any questions so far? No? So what we're going to do now is a whistle-stop tour of some of the services, and then we're going to get down to some demos. Hopefully, in the meantime, you've all done lots of input, and we can take a look at this input and see how it's done. So that's the bit I like. So there's vision-related services. What can it do? It can recognize landmarks, public figures, brands. It can do typical image recognition stuff. If you've used Google and its image search stuff, then you've used something that's very, very similar. It can describe and tag images. Now that's actually a very interesting thing, because a lot of companies have huge amounts of data, unstructured data sitting there. They've got all this data and they've got no metadata. So they've got billions of photos of things, but they can never find them because there's no metadata, because metadata sucks. Putting in metadata is hard, people can't be bothered to do it, so you can't find unstructured data because there simply isn't the metadata. You can extract text from printed text and handwriting. Big deal. That's OCR and ICR, old technology. You can recognize faces from custom dictionaries. This is where we start getting into the scary Big Brother-esque type stuff. Microsoft like to tell us that they're much more concerned about privacy than certain other technology companies. But with this particular technology, you can upload a database of up to 1 million faces and use that for facial recognition. I believe Uber are actually using that now as a way of logging in, where effectively the drivers log in with a face login. I think that's the technology that's underpinning that. So you can do some scary stuff with facial recognition. You can also do some custom recognition from domain-specific images. What does that mean? It means that you could actually train a machine learning model to recognize the difference between a cup and a saucer. So that's the sort of thing you could do. Now, if you're in the business of selling crockery, that's actually quite a useful thing. So you have a warehouse full of inventory. And what you'd actually like to do is you'd like to know how many cups, how many saucers you've got, but your stock control system isn't any good. So by training the AI, by training machine learning to recognize the difference between things, you can literally count things. There's some fascinating uses of this. We're actually going to do a demo of that, but we're not going to be counting cups and saucers. We're going to be trying to identify cats, because the internet is full of pictures of cats, and cats are much more fun than cups and saucers, and it's actually a much harder challenge. But anyway, more of this later. There's video-related services. Now it's pretty much everything you can do with an image, except moving. It'll also transcribe. I have seen a demo of this. I'm not going to do this now, where it'll do sentiment analysis. So it can film somebody talking, and it can say, is this person happy? Is this person sad? Is this person manic? Is this person calm? All sort of things, sentiment analysis. And offensive content. And that's something else we'll come back to, because offensive content is fun. So, text. With text, you can do stuff like extract key phrases, sentiment analysis, which we're going to come to in our demo in a minute, text-to-speech and speech-to-text, language translation. It's all the sort of stuff that Google Translate you take for granted. You can do this yourself. If you want to do your own document translation, you can. We've got language parsing in there, which gets a little bit more complicated. I've noticed that Office 365 has got this neat ability to actually summarize a document for you. So it takes a big, long document and condenses it into a paragraph. Unfortunately, I haven't actually exposed that yet, which is a shame, because at some point it will come along. So in a corporate environment, it's actually really useful. If you have a long, rambling document and it can give you the too long, didn't read summary of things, that's extremely powerful, isn't it? Because you can pretend to be the most knowledgeable person about what's going on in the company, and all you've done is read the précis, which has been generated by machine learning. Of course, if that process doesn't work very well, you could be hideously misinformed as well. But you know, that's life. I guess if you want to.
Already Google does it. When you search it, Google search it gives the summary description on the top.
Yeah. I mean, that's the direction we're heading, where you have all these services. Effectively, what Google is doing in public, Azure Cognitive Services lets you do on your own private, walled garden. So some of the things. Document summary is actually a really, really powerful thing, because basically a lot of people have so much documents to read, they couldn't possibly read all those documents. So being able to have an intelligent summary that gives you the key parts of it is actually really, really powerful as a time saver. And you know, earlier we talked about how people aren't going to, how this might change people's jobs and actually automate jobs away. If you think in the legal profession, a lot of what people do is basically reading long documents and then drawing some conclusions and putting them in a short sentence form. So maybe it's more transformative than we think. Decision. That means deciding to do things. It can detect offensive text. More on this later. We can detect offensive images and video. I ain't demoing that in front of you. Too risky. Sorry. If you want to have a look, go ahead, get your own tenant. It's your problem. We're not going there. It can also flag offensive content for further screening, which is again quite powerful. There's some additional stuff in there about personalizing data and anomaly detection, which is in preview at the moment. We're not going to dwell upon this stuff too much. So it covers a breadth of different stuff. And lastly, what I've shoved in here in the last moment is there is something called AI Builder, where we talked about having custom libraries of images and teaching it how to do custom recognition tasks. AI Builder is like the dumbed down version, which is why I felt drawn to having a go and seeing if I could actually build myself a model that would be able to tell two things apart. We're going to have a little look at that at the end if there's time, which I think we've got. So we can dig in there. You can build your own models for things like image classification. That means recognizing whether something's a cup or a saucer. Form recognition, that means being able to scan forms and extracting things like being able to look at an invoice and extract who the customer is, what the amounts are, all that sort of stuff. Text classification, that means looking at text and deciding things about that text. And lastly, binary classification, which means looking at data and trying to determine patterns. In other words, based on this data, you can use it for things like, is there something about the data in this customer that indicates that this customer might be a non-payer later on? Very, very useful for e-commerce, that you could actually analyze the data about customers and their purchasing patterns that might indicate a fraudulent transaction, stuff like that. You can basically throw it data and let it try and look for common patterns in there to make a decision. So again, this is stuff you can use. So without further ado, we're going to come to some demos. And this is where we find out whether my stuff has actually been working while I've been talking, or whether I've run out of Azure credit and I'm just going to look like a complete idiot. So always a fun moment for me. As I said before, I'm using Microsoft Flow and SharePoint because it makes it easy to demo stuff, because I really don't want to stand here and write code. You probably don't want to see me write code. I don't want to write code in front of you guys. There's nothing to say that you can't use cognitive services with your choice of technology stack. Again, this is very, very open to whatever your chosen weapon is. And I give you the caveat that this is not production quality code. People say that about all the code I write, but that's another story. And lastly, I just say, have you tweeted an image yet?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, let's go. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a look. So hopefully you've all tweeted loads of images. And what I've done is I have a little flow that sits there and it scans Twitter for that tag, and it shoves it into a SharePoint document library. And there's another little flow that says, oh, something's been added to that document library. Let's go take a look and work out what the hell it is. And then let's go and extract some tags. So we look for unstructured tags about metadata. and then we're going to try and make a sentence to describe what the hell we've got. So this can be anything from spooky to just downright bizarre. And I have no idea which side of the line any given image will be. I did this demo a couple of months back at the Dynamics 365 user group, and there was a person there called Megan Walker, who's an MVP, who was on before me. She tweeted a photo of herself, and spookily, Cognitive Services managed to realize it was her. So it said, Megan Walker wearing glasses standing in a room. And that was just freaky. That freaked her out. You could hear a pin drop at that moment. I wasn't expecting that either. You think, holy shit, this is good. But then the next photo she tweeted was of a cushion with a pineapple on it. And Azure Cognitive Services cogitated on that, and it said, yep, it's a baby. So go figure. So on the one hand, you think, wow, that's spooky stalker genius. And on the other hand, you think, what on earth were they drinking? So let's take a look.
Sorry, just on that as well. I guess, does it also tell you how confident it feels?
It does. It does. But in the interest of brevity, I'm not actually showing that bit in there. But effectively, when it gives you the tags, it will give you a confidence level of those tags. And if you were writing production quality code, which I don't, you would probably decide to take the 10 most confident tags and discard all the other random stuff. Because let's face it, some of the other tags can be like some sort of word association game. So without further ado, we're going to take a look at what we've got. So I'm just going to refresh this page, and we're going to see what has been added today. So that was 16 minutes ago. This is a share. Oh, I just realized you can't actually see this, can you? I'm just going to attempt to drag this. Which way has my desktop extended?
Keep going that way.
This is not good for my hand-to-eye coordination, you know. Now, we're not doing a very good job of reading that, so I'm just going to I'm going to have to try and zoom this in, so bear with me. This is why I hate AV equipment, because no matter how much you prepare, when you actually stand up there, I suppose I could actually just flip back.
Control plus, maybe.
Control plus, let's give Control plus a go and see whether it will save the bacon.
Okay.
Right, is that big enough for you to be able to read? If I give it a bit of scroll. This is why I don't code on stage, you see, because I can't even work a mouse. Right, so this is the first one here. You know, can you read some of these? So basically it shoves some things into a SharePoint list, and this says a group of people standing in front of a crowd. And as you can see, there's some tags here. I don't think you can read. Can anybody read this? Or am I just reading you random stuff? It says, person, outdoor, people, crowd, large group, kite, standing, watching man. It's just like some sort of crazy word association game, isn't it? And
It's Rayman.
Bingo! So anyway, let's go and see what we've actually got. So this is the image, and I've never seen this image before in my life, so we could be in for a surprise. So it says a group of people standing in front of crowds. And I'm as curious as you are. Actually, it's much better to see it this way. Right. So, actually, that looks like the start of a race, doesn't it? That's not a bad attempt, really, is it? What sort of race is it? A running race, looking at that. Who tweeted that?
That's from me.
Okay, so it hasn't done bad there. So it says that it's got, that's not a bad tag, is it? The tagging is useful if you're actually searching for pictures about those things and you type crowd and you get that back. That's not bad. The description is not a million miles off. It's not a bad description. So let's move on to the next one and see what else we've got.
Is this what stock photography companies use then? Or?
I'd imagine they might use some of those things because otherwise they just couldn't get through the volume. Okay, I'm just scrolling up. Now, this shows how a cat lying on top of a wooden table. Now that's pretty prescriptive, isn't it? That is a very exact description of what's going on. So let's actually see whether we, in fact, do have a cat sitting on top of a table. Or are we going to end up with something completely and utterly nuts? So it's talking about a black cat indoors, various tags which might be useful to search for things. And we're going to click here. And that is, I believe it's a cat sitting on top of a chair, so rubbish, isn't it? Absolute rubbish. Terrible. Instead of a cat lying on top of a table and it's a chair. Terrible. So not a bad description, is it, under the circumstance? You think that's actually a description that would be passable from a human? The tags are probably useful. If you were looking for cat pictures, heaven forbid, you would be able to find that picture. Let's take a look at another one. I'm going to go to the next one, and it says a large balloon in the air. And it's got various tags here, so let's just see. So it's got lots of tags about aircraft, balloons and things like that. I'm kind of hoping this is a balloon. I'm definitely getting a balloony feeling here, but let's just see. And phew, it is actually a balloon. Not bad. So again, if you think about you having millions and millions of images in an unstructured fashion, we've actually got a decent description out of that. We've actually got some tags we could search for those things out of it. Most companies collect data like it's going out of fashion, and it's unstructured data. They just simply don't. They simply can't find the data again afterwards because it just gets chucked on a hard drive somewhere and sits there to rot. The fact you can actually find things now might mean you can use the data, or at least if you know the data's no good, get rid of it. Why store it? So there's some potential there for doing useful stuff. In my world of intranets and things like that, you find that there are lots and lots of pieces of data that aren't just documents or images, and they just exist there in this sort of dark underworld of SharePoint, and there's no descriptions and things. So it's actually quite a useful thing, if you're prepared to pay for it, of literally run through all your images, catalogue them, and see whether they're any good or get rid of them. So if we go up to the next one, a group of people on a motorcycle in front of a crowd. Now that's going to be something, isn't it? A group of people on a motorcycle. No, no, I'm not seeing that there, are we? Can anybody see a motorcycle, or is it? Is it an invisible motorcycle? I can see a llama, or am I seeing things? Or is it a horse? There's some sort of vaguely llama-like creature there.
Circles maybe on the building.
Yeah, okay. So that's actually, this illustrates the point very well that for all its points where it does a good job, sometimes it's pretty surreal, isn't it? Because there's definitely a crowd of people there, and I'm not seeing motorcycles, and I'd love to know how the algorithm has decided on. Where's the motorcycle? So obviously what a 2-year-old can tell you, machine learning can't. That's the thing you have to understand. Sorry, can you see?
The curve.
Oh, the curve. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm not machine learning algorithm, so I couldn't tell you.
The chimney, the building, and the curve.
Yeah. So I think what we're seeing is that maybe human intervention is necessary on this, that you, in terms of the data had, if you have data with no if you have unstructured data with no metadata, this is probably an improvement on that. You wouldn't want to bet your life on it. You wouldn't want to, say, put catalogue items in your e-commerce site based on the description of this, but it might be good enough if you wanted to find images to potentially then put onto a site. But I think what we're seeing here is some human intervention is kind of handy. You can't let this thing run wild on its own, can you? Or I wouldn't.
You know these extra security questions that sometimes come up when you see, click all the images that have a traffic light in them. You could use that API to sort of circumvent that.
I think you probably could actually, wouldn't you? Because they say like click all the images that are a car, and it's pretty damn good at recognizing cars. Now somebody told me yesterday that it has 80 different categories of thing it can recognize. It might be more than that, but I'd imagine that car and traffic light and shop might come into there, and it can do numbers. So I think in terms of if you're going to build a capture buster, this would probably do your trick pretty well, wouldn't it? So there's some fascinating ideas that everybody thought they were being clever, moving away from the squiggly numbers that I couldn't read to having an image-based one, thinking, ha, I've fooled you now. And I think cognitive services would have a pretty good stab at it, wouldn't it? It's a really good point, actually, that maybe the squiggly numbers are actually more effective. Is it just me, or I can't answer those ones? In fact, I think if you can answer it, the chances are you're a machine, because humans are really, really bad at it. They've got progressively worse and worse, haven't they, to the point where you're thinking, no, I'm not even going to try. Have we got any more? No, that's it. What we can actually look at is a few from the past.
Sorry, can I ask you mine? This one without description, with only one
Holding.
paragraph. Yeah, that might be mine, not that one.
Up or
This
down?
one with an empty description.
It says holding.
As if we couldn't
Yeah,
understand what
up.
it was.
Up.
Now that one there
This
says
one?
tag.
Okay, let's see. So it's completely given up on this one, which is good. That's the nature of demos. So what is holding? So the best it could do is holding. I haven't put the certainty level on here. What I should actually do is rewrite my demo to put a confidence level. So it might say confidence 0% or something like that. So see how sure it is. But holding, let's see what holding means.
Ah, that's mine.
It's a spider.
Mm.
It's interesting they didn't get a spider actually. You'd think it would get a spider. In the demo I did last night, somebody stuck a picture of a rhino on there, and it said a rhino and an elephant, which was interesting because there was only one animal. But it actually was pretty good to guess that there was a rhino there. And the fact it got confused between a rhino and an elephant, I believe some contestant on The Apprentice became confused about the differences between rhinos and elephants just the other day I saw on the news. So you're thinking they're at the level of an apprentice contestant. So, you know, the machine learning cognitive services stuff is at the level of somebody who can appear on reality TV as a measure of intelligence. I don't know whether that's above or below a worm. So your decision on that one. Somebody's, let's just see. So I'll just take you the spooky one from before. Here we go. This was the one here. So this was categorized. This is the one that really made me surprised. It says Megan Walker wearing glasses and smiling at the camera. And this is the one I don't want to edit. I just want to click. Thank you. And there we go, that's Megan Walker. So she posted that thinking, oh, it'll say something, and she really, her jaw dropped and hit the floor at that time. And I was quite surprised as well. I assumed somewhere along the line she consented for Microsoft to be able to process her image and do facial recognition, but it's quite freaky when that sort of thing happens. That, you know, she is just a random person. She doesn't work for Microsoft, she's an MVP, and she happened to be the speaker on before me. She posted that picture and it said, yep, that's Megan Walker smiling at the camera. So for certain things, it's pretty good. Any questions so far? I'll just close some of these windows down because we're drowning in windows.
Can I just ask, sorry, so would you get charged per picture there?
Yes, yeah, it's consumption based, so the flow is obviously going ka-ching, tenths of a penny each time, and there's a certain charge for the recognition. You basically, it depends on the volume. You're talking fractional pennies, but yeah. And at the moment, this is running against my Azure free credits, hopefully, if they're still there. So it's not expensive. If you're going to do a million of these images, then it could start running up a big bill. But for purposes of demo, you can stay well within the free tier. I think I accidentally left something running over the weekend where it's constantly recognizing the same image every 10 seconds, and I think that ended up costing Blacklight about 150 quid. But the costs aren't huge, but if you think about these things at scale, then it does start to cost.
Can you train it to, let's say you've got a bunch of family photos and you say that's my daughter, that's my son, and then let it loose on the millions of photos that you've taken?
We're going to come to that in the end, actually, because that's called custom vision. That's the idea that you can train it. This is a general purpose thing where you literally set it loose on other pictures and it tries to recognize them. I've tried experimenting with this about much more esoteric things, like say getting it to recognize machines, you know, images that customers might have of say machine parts or something like that. And to be honest, it just does a bad job. It'll do surreal things like saying motorbike or banana or archipelago or other things like that. So if it's a commonly seen item in its relatively well-lit conditions, it does a bloody good job. If it's something much more esoteric, it doesn't do well, but we can train the model for domain-specific recognition. We'll come to that in the end. So it's a good question, but this is a general-purpose tool. But if you think about some of the things we write as developers, sometimes being able to just recognize a photo and put some metadata against something is useful, because we generate images all the time and people can never be bothered to put metadata in. If you can add some of that metadata for somebody and say, is this metadata correct? And give them the chance to say, here, I've tagged this as a balloon, is this correct? That's much, much easier for a user than prompting them to actually enter something, isn't it? So it's involving the human saying, I've done this for you, is this correct? It's a much, much easier proposition than saying, can you write a description of this? Right, so let me just get my close some of these windows up again, otherwise I'm going to be drowning in tabs. Any other questions so far before I go back to PowerPoint? So we've done our Twitter thing. I don't know whether this thing's gone to sleep again. So now we're going to talk about sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis is an interesting one. You know, I talked about how these things appear to be intelligent and they're not. They're actually just clever machines. They're idiot savants, they're autistic, they're Rain Man, they're sort of things like that. Sentiment analysis is the idea that you look at a piece of text and you decide from this piece of text, is somebody happy or is somebody upset? I'll say a few things about this as well. You assume that this requires a degree of intelligence. It doesn't. What you can do is you can look at every possible word that somebody uses and you can award that word a weighting. You can say happy, excellent, awesome. You can say those are positive terms and you can award them some weighting that says they're positive. If somebody says awful, abysmal, a shit show, or other terms like that, you can say these are negative terms. So what we're going to do is we're going to scan through a piece of text and we're going to count how many positive terms there are, count how many negative terms there are, look at the weighting, and from there we're going to give some idea of whether the sentiment expressed in a particular piece of text is positive or negative. That's how sentiment analysis works. I don't think it's cleverer than that. But the funny thing is, it actually works quite well. It really doesn't do irony and sarcasm, perhaps reflecting its American origins, and the Americans are infamously bad at irony. But it does all right. What we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the forms you've submitted and see how we get on. And then we're going to have a look at some reviews of a restaurant, some restaurant reviews that I've taken off TripAdvisor. And then lastly, because being scatological is quite fun, we're going to have a look at some fake reviews. Have you ever seen the reviews on Amazon for the sugar-free gummy bears? No? No? There was a trend on Amazon a couple of years ago for writing fake reviews of things where people would write completely over the top ones. I think there was another one for hair remover as well, where people would write these incredibly complicated...
There was a banana slicer. That is definitely one. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, as a joke or
as a joke, yeah. And we'll have a look at this because I'm not just being scatological. It's actually important to see how well it does with something that's an obviously fake piece of data. So if you were making business decisions on these reviews, would this work when somebody just started deciding to be sarcastic or funny or irony or using irony and things like that? So it's an interesting case. If you're actually making business decisions on there with no human involved, it just shows that these things can be skewed. But my experience, we'll see in a moment, is that generally, for most cases, it actually does a pretty good job. With strange cases of very short reviews or people trying to be funny, it doesn't do so well. So anyway, we'll take a look and see for ourselves how we think it's done. So now I'm going to challenge myself to, conveniently, I really can't get the hang of the mouse. Where's my mouse gone? Oh, there we go. Right, thank you. So I'll just go back here and we'll take a look at sentiment analysis. And we'll leave the gummy bears to last. So, right, we've got some things here. Somebody last night wrote a long rant about Coldplay, and it actually thought that Coldplay were quite good based on that, which is not the intention of that, so it shows that it doesn't necessarily respond. Can you see from back here? I'll try and click on this to make it a bit bigger. Can you see here? Unfortunately, it's got a nice little formatter. Let's just try this again. Can you see here that this has got 5 stars? I can't quite count from there, my neck doesn't work. So somebody has said, pizza and beer was great, my mind has collapsed with the intensity of tech. Would you say that's a positive thing to say? Yeah, it's got 5 stars. So you can see that the sentiment analysis hasn't done bad on there, has it? So you might think, as an adult human, that somebody was possibly being slightly ironic there, but in terms of the words, if you take them at face value, that's a good description. You can see it's got 5 stars. This one here, platform toilet. Wow, this toilet is the best I've ever sat on. That is praise indeed for a toilet, isn't it? And it's got 5 stars. So you can see that it's done all right, even with quite a short bit. So the next one after this, one of these days somebody's going to trip me up with something awful on here, and I'm just going to sit there and read it out to you as if on auto cue, and I'm going to say, that guy Dylan Hayes, he's a complete, yeah. Anyway, The talk on Friday night may be a big mistake, but lots of interesting topics and fun interactions upcoming. Should be a fantastic talk upcoming, and that's got 5 stars as well. So you can see the language is positive. It's giving it lots of stars.
So don't we put the star rating?
You do, and what I forgot to do in my demo is I meant to compare the star rating that you've given versus the cognitive services one, so you can compare the two.
Because
Now,
all you're just showing us now is what we put in before.
no, these are the calculated ones. There's the review star rating that I haven't actually got around to wiring up. Those are the star ratings that have come from cognitive services. I hasten to add, just in case you think I'm cheating now, I haven't actually got around to comparing the two, because my next stage on this is to compare the star rating you have given with the star rating that it's calculated and see how much delta there is, because that's an interesting thing. In your particular line of work, you want to know, it might actually be a good way of detecting fraudulent reviews, that if the sentiment analysis thinks a different number of stars to what somebody has actually awarded, perhaps that's a sign that something fishy is going on, isn't it? You're looking for anomalies in your data. Obviously, detecting fake reviews is big business at the moment, isn't it? There's a lot resting on it. And I'm sure the likes of TripAdvisor use much more sophisticated things than that. But even at a lower level, you can actually do things to try and work out whether somebody's being positive or negative. If you think of all the times that when you write applications that it ingests customer data, say customer service emails, all sorts of things, if you can scan through all those and say, hey, this person's really, really pissed off, perhaps you should have a look at his case first. That's a useful thing, isn't it, being able to prioritize stuff, because you can also get it to look on social media. So if every time your organization is mentioned and you look at sentiment analysis, if somebody's ranting about that, you want to know, and you can wire this stuff up very, very quickly. It would take you about 5 minutes to wire up a flow to analyze this data. We can actually have a look at one of the flows if you want to see how simple it is. But it's really simple stuff. You can actually generate quite powerful things quite quickly. I don't know whether you guys have any interest in seeing the flows?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, we'll take a look at one of those. This is probably a good one to look at. Right, forgive Grumpy Cat. You can see that here's a list of flows, and we'll take a first look. Now, there's 2 parts to the pattern I've used here. Is a flow is kind of like a noddy version of a little unit of functionality. So there's a whole bunch of code, there's a whole bunch of flows concerned with this, and I've got various flows that scrape things from Twitter. So I've got one here, this is the first bit, and this flow literally sits here. We'll have a look in edit. This isn't the interesting bit. This flow says when a tweet is posted, and it has that hashtag in, basically stick it in a SharePoint list, and that's all. But then the interesting stuff happens. We've got something else watching that list. If I can hit the back button successfully. And obviously that's a no. And we can say analyze image. So let's go take a look at this. And you can see it's really quite simple in here. What it does is when an item is created, we shove some stuff into variables. This is the world of flow, so everything's very simple. Even initializing a variable gets a step. This truly is sort of, what would you say, primary school programming. But, oh, an HTTP call there. Oh, that's advanced stuff there for me. This is pushing the edge of my coding ability at the moment. So what we do is we do an HTTP call to Twitter, and you say, hey, Twitter, here's my image URL from the tweet. Go get me the body of that image. That's what I want, because I want to get back the image that somebody's posted. That's right at the edge of my programming ability there, I hasten to add. And here you say, analyze an image. So I say, hey, Cognitive Services, take a look at this body. Here's my body of the image. Go see what you think of that. And then after that, we've just got a couple of loops. And that loop basically goes through all the captions and shoves them into a variable. The other one here goes through all the tags. And then last but not least, we stick it in SharePoint. And we're talking about really, really simple. If you were going to write that in C#, even allowing for the fact that the code would be a little less brief, you're not talking about a huge amount of code here, are you? I'm sure in your own minds you can visualize this as code, because the API calls are really quite simple.
I've never used one, but is there like a code behind stuff? Can you click a button and say, show me the code that's behind it?
You can't. That's the magic of Flow. Actually, it generates some JSON in the background, and you get to something called Azure Logic Apps, which is the same technology, but a slightly more programmer-friendly view. But
so it might be a nice way to learn the API from the developer.
yeah. But the nice thing about this is you can play with this quite easily because you're using the same API, so you're trying to see whether something works. It's a good way of wiring this stuff up really quickly. So if I started to dismantle a long, complicated piece of code on stage, I think I'd fall flat on my face. With something like a flow, we can say, hey, this is what it's doing. And really, the only two things that count in there is one of them is says, go to Twitter, grab me the binaries. The other one that says, hey, Cognitive Services, what do you think of that? And then we just get back some stuff. But all the wiring is much, much easier here.
Is the flow part of the Azure, you say the free credits we get?
Flow is part of Office 365. So if you've got Office 365 or your customer has Office 365 licenses, then they have Flow. Flow comes for free. You end up paying extra for it if you want to do certain things. There's two costs here. Is you have the cognitive services cost for when I'm saying cognitive services, do your cognitation, and there's the cost of the flow because it's consumption based. But we're talking about pretty cheap. If you're looking at a way of prototyping these things and seeing whether they work for you, this is quite a cost-effective way of doing it because you can usually do this on the freebie stuff that you get. And then later on you might decide that actually we're going to rewrite this in a grown-up language, but this is a good way of just seeing whether it works, showing that to people further up the decision tree than you, and saying, is this something we're interested in? Because you could write something to do sentiment analysis on tweets that mention your employer's name. It would take you about 10 minutes to write one of those, which we're just going to have a look at next.
Sorry, one more thing. What about the alternate for the flow? What happens if I say I want to pay for this, whatever the license it is? So do you write your own code to build this, or has that got any alternates?
Oh yeah, no, there's lots and lots of different APIs. There's a whole REST API, there's libraries written on top of this sort of stuff, so you can use anything. It's just, in this particular case, I've chosen Flow because it's a nice, easy one to demo. It's just a friendly way of demoing these things. I've also taken this to Office 365 focus groups, so to them, Flow is much more native to them. I appreciate for you guys, this feels like a slightly weird environment. The people in the Dynamics 365 world are becoming familiar with Flow, so it's something that's becoming more and more pervasive. But as a prototyping tool, from your guys' point of view, it's actually quite useful as a prototyping tool. Just if you want to see how well it works, I'll show you how the sentiment analysis works in Twitter. Sorry, the form analysis. So basically, if I here I've got sentiment analysis on reviews, and the flow we've got here is really quite simple. It says there's another, you all filled in a Microsoft form, right? Those of you that filled it in. What happened is that form wrote to a SharePoint list. I've got a flow that sits here and says as soon as something gets added to that list, go take a look, and literally it's one call saying detect sentiment and shove, can you read it? It says shove the review and the title at it, and then just get back a score. It's really that simple. You are talking about 3 stages here of when an item gets added, you know, it's kind of like a webhook or whatever, you can think of it in that sort of way. When something happens, go show Cognitive Services the text, then say what the sentiment is. It is that simple. If you wanted to rewrite that in C# or something, it would be probably a similarly small number of lines, the actual core of it. Everybody with me so far? I'm sorry, I should have rewritten all this stuff to be in a more languagey type of, codey type of way rather than all this sort of Mickey Mouse stuff here. But I think you guys get the idea, don't you? You're thinking that, well, if Dylan can stand there and talk about it, it can't be that hard. So. Right, so where are we after this? So we were going to look at another demo, weren't we? So any questions so far on the workings of the bits you've seen so far? No, it really is quite simple. That's the beauty of this. It's not just the power of it, it's how simple it is to do useful things. Now we're going to step into another demo where the fun really begins. So I'm going to try my clicker because I've spent all that money on a clicker that's not clicking. It was clicking earlier, but anyway, that's my problem, not yours. Let's just. Do you know what? PowerPoint hates me sometimes. Here we go. Right, so we've had the sentiment analysis stuff, and now we're going to talk about moderation. Now, does anybody here have a major problem with some swear words? No? Obviously, we're going to slightly steer clear of anything that would be considered legally actionable, racist, or stuff like that. So we're just dealing with some good old-fashioned Anglo-Saxon terms. If you think about this scenario, that it's quite a typical situation you have, that you might have some sort of communication within the company or external portal or something, and you'd like to take a look at that content and see whether somebody's saying bad things on there. It's quite a common scenario. So for the purposes of this little demo, what I've set up is when I'm going to type some text in there and it's going to screen it for various forms of naughty content. And if there is naughty content, it's going to fire off an approval flow. It's going to say, hey, adult please, somebody said some rude words, could you check this please? So it's a typical scenario where you might want to screen through content and say, is there anything dodgy about this? Does this need to be looked at by a human? Pardon me. That was my clicker, I hasten to add. It wasn't just the pizza. So, thank you, clicker. What was that about? My clicker started farting. Whatever can I say? I start talking about. Right. So we're going to have a. I lost my mouse again. This is becoming a habit, isn't it? Right. So I'm just going to step over to my demo, and we're going to take a look, and we're going to go for some moderation. And again, I'm just going to bash some things into a SharePoint list. And pretend that that one hasn't been added in here. So we're going to add a new one. So let's just say I'm going to demonstrate my inability to type. So I'm just going to give it a title. And what I would like somebody to do is I would like somebody to give me a swear word. Come on.
Shit.
Shit. Okay. Any advance on shit, please?
Apple.
Apple. Anybody? Somebody's got to drop the F-bomb, come on.
Fuck.
Okay. Anybody else?
Dick. That's a tough one.
Anybody?
Cunt.
Okay. Oh, we haven't had that before, but you know, it's Friday night, so what the hell? Anybody else? We got enough.
Brexit.
Do you know what? You're not the first person to suggest it.
Sorry, I apologise.
Yeah, we're going to talk about custom swear words in a minute, actually, but that leads nicely on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to submit this to my Smutomatic and see what it thinks and see how many of those things we think are there. So what I've done is I've set it up where, if you can see here, it's basically going to analyse shit, apple, fuck, dick, cunt, Brexit, which sounds like the Houses of Parliament yesterday, doesn't it? It's going to analyse that and tell me, has it detected anything? If you can see here, it's got the warning triangle right away, and you can see up here it says, content approval, help, bring an adult, somebody's being naughty. So we're going to have a look, and if we scroll over, we'll see what it found offensive. And you will see that it said it's found shit, fuck, cunt offensive, funnily enough. You'd be interested to know that it didn't.
Is that because Brexit's the will of the people?
Oh, of course, yes, actually. You know, you should never mention politics, religion and sport in front of customers or things. But, yeah, but yeah. We'll cover that in a minute, actually, about adding extra stuff. I'm probably on the hit list now of that Cummins chap, aren't I? It's been streamed all over the internet, and the thugs are going to be waiting for me outside. Fortunately, I do endurance running as a hobby of mine, so I will easily outrun them. As long as I get a good start in, they're never going to catch me. It has looked through there, and it is American. So American swearing is different to British swearing. Their vocabulary is slightly different in terms of swearing. So if you call somebody a wanker, you'll get away with it. It does obviously have some of the same swearing. So it is able to detect some swearing, but not all swearing. Now, it doesn't understand more vernacular British phrases, and goodness me, have we got a lot of different phrases in this country for various rude body parts and things like that. So it's not perfect, but it will pick up some of the big ones. Obviously, somebody's dropped the F-bomb and the C-bomb, and it's picked it up, hasn't it, quite quickly. The other thing you could do is you could do some sort of DLP. Do you understand what I mean by DLP? Data loss prevention. So you might decide on your extranet that you're not going to allow people to put addresses and email addresses on there because you want to limit how people can do it. It's quite common in reviews. eBay do that, don't they, where they stop you putting your email address in there. So we're actually going to look at this for other forms of content. So moderation isn't just about swearing and Brexit. It's about looking for other content that you might wish to limit. So I'm just going to give a quick demo of that.
Is it just how interest is it? Because obviously we put English words in there, but I guess, you know, I assume it's got to be multilingual.
It is. It understands swearing in 100 languages, which is quite impressive. Now, does somebody want to give me a swear word in another language?
But are they American swear words in multilingual? That's tough, isn't it?
I don't know. Can somebody give me a swear
I
word?
just can't spell them for you.
Okay, can somebody type me a rude word in another language? Thank you.
Sorry, I'm Italian, so...
Yeah, give it some Italian swearing. Refuse. As many as you can. Any more?
So just
Oh, sorry, it needs to be not in the title, it needs to be in the body. So can you... I'll cut and paste it down there for you. Cut, I'll just paste it here.
does it, if you try to mask the...
No, it doesn't understand. Could you type that again, please? Because I'm
There's no
incompetent.
paste?
I think I must have. Can you see?
Oh, there,
paste. Yeah. Right. Let's see what it thinks of that. Now, I haven't actually had the opportunity to demonstrate swearing in other languages yet, so this is new ground for me. So I have no idea what's going to happen. We'll give it a moment to cogitate over that. It sounds rude. It just has a shape of a rude word to it. Give it a moment or two to process it. What we'll do in the meantime is I will demonstrate that it can also pick out other things that are offensive.
But can I ask, does it get if you try to mask the word, like a sheet with the...
It does, because it's dumb.
Yeah.
It's pretty dumb about those sort of things. So it's just looking for people being obviously swearing rather than somebody saying all the various things people do to mask it. It's not that smart. But then you could argue that that's not offensive at that point because everybody knows what it means, but it isn't actually the offensive word. You know, like Americans when they say heck instead of hell and darn instead of damn and things like that. It's not that sophisticated. But what I'm going to try and do is give it an address and a phone number and an email address and see whether it can pick out this stuff. So can anybody tell me the address here? Or an address of anywhere? Shall we try number 10, Downing Street? SW1, I don't know, 9A, just a guess.
Streaming input as well, if you want both.
London, something like that. I'm just going to bump, and I didn't do a very good job of typing that, did I? I really am hopeless at typing when my head's in a different direction and not. So I'm going to try putting an address in there, and then I'm going to put an email address in here. This is really going to get me on a few watch lists, isn't it, I think? Let's just submit that and see
Just
what
put
happens.
boom in there as well.
Now, interestingly enough, it doesn't appear to have picked up the Italian swear word in that particular case. So I must try it with some more swear words from overseas. Try it with a vocabulary. But apparently it does pick up swear words, but it's failed to do that. Now, the interesting thing is, Microsoft tell you that it detects addresses, and it does detect addresses, as long as the address is in America. So it'll find American addresses. It doesn't seem to, at this point, in none of the demos I've ever done, I've got it successfully to recognize a UK or non-US address. If I put in an address of somewhere I used to live in the States, it actually does a pretty good job of finding it. So let's just try and type.
Someone tells me that if you speak to Siri in a British accent, she won't understand you. But if you repeat it in an American accent, she'll more likely to understand you.
Yeah, it is one of those things that the Americanness of these things sometimes shines through. Doesn't do irony, it doesn't seem to understand British addresses. So if I bung this in there, actually, interestingly enough, you see here, it has actually detected an email, but it hasn't picked other things. And you see there, it's picked out the email address, but it hasn't picked out the address. So you can see it's not perfect. It should, in a moment, pick out that as a US address. Now, you see it's not perfect, but it does actually do a reasonably good job of working these things. Now, one of the other questions is, somebody said the word Brexit to me. What happens if you've got swear words that you want to add that aren't actually in any of the dictionaries? It's quite a common scenario. If you were thinking about an extra type scenario, you might want to add the names of your competitors to a list of words that merit moderation, right? Merit, Moderation, that's the one. So if somebody's talking about your competitors, you might want to actually put a moderation block on that sort of thing, because somebody might be saying, these guys are absolute idiots, you want to go with the guys down the road, Acme Software, they know what they're talking about. So that might be something you want to moderate. Now, in this particular demo, what I've done is I've added some words to a custom swearing dictionary. I don't know whether you know it, but there is a place in Dorset called the Isle of Portland. It's famous for two things. One of the things it's famous for is it is the birthplace of a Mr. Cobb who invented relational databases. The other thing it's famous for is that on the island of Portland, it is considered the most rude thing you can possibly say to say the word rabbit. Rabbit is an incredibly rude word in Portland. So in this particular scenario, we wish to stop people saying the word rabbit, because rabbit is highly offensive. So I've actually added it in the background. I made an API call and I've added it to my custom dictionary. I've also added the word Belgium, because those of you who have read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy will know that Belgium is the rudest word in the universe. A bit of an arbitrary collection of words there, but I thought it's much safer than adding the word Brexit to your custom swearing dictionary. It's less likely to get you lynched, except in the island of Portland, perhaps, where they don't like you saying rabbit. So I will demonstrate that works by, hopefully, being able to spell Belgium correctly. So custom, and I will say rabbit, and I will say Belgium. And I almost always seem to get it round the wrong way, don't I? There we go, Belgium is happy again now. So if I add that to my custom dictionary, if you see in the meantime, it's actually managed to process this one, and it's picked out of there, it's picked out an address. So it says, yeah, you've put in an address in there, so you found it. So it does actually detect things. Usually these things are a little bit asynchronous, it takes a little bit of time to do it, a minute or so. Oh, and you can see here, it has detected rabbit. And for some reason, either I've misspelt Belgium, or it's decided not to find Belgium. But you can see here, we've added custom swear words to that, which for the purpose of our demo is Belgium and rabbit. Any questions so far? Do you think this is something you could use for other stuff? I know at the end of the day, it's basically parsing for words, but it's a much nicer way of doing that.
Would you be showing a demo like from the scratch how to do that, or would it be a big task to do that?
Yeah, well, we'll take a look at what's behind it. I mean, literally, there's a flow behind it, and it's the simplest flow where you just say, hey, content services moderator, moderate on this, and then if there's a problem with that, flag it up for moderation.
I have never used this service before. First, I'm going to try it with Azure if possible.
Yeah.
So
what we'll do is we'll take a. How are we doing for time, by the way? Are we? Nobody's in any great rush at this point, aren't we? Because I'm aware that I've been here for an hour now. Yeah. Are we all okay for time? Yeah. Right. What we'll do is we'll take a look at the flow behind there.
So is flow in the Azure portal? Is it just another bit of that?
It's actually in the Office 365 stuff. It's a separate part, but it's very, very similar to Azure Logic Apps.
365 subscription.
Yeah, you need a 365 subscription. I mean, you can pretty much Flow uses the same connectors as Azure Logic Apps. So all these things, where I'm wiring up Flow, you could actually wire up Logic Apps just as easily. Right. You might feel more comfortable with Logic Apps if you fancy going for this new-fangled low-code type solution. In fact, the connectors are shared between them, so exactly the same connectors I'm using in these flows you could use in Logic Apps if you felt more comfortable in that environment. Now, the interesting thing is Logic Apps, you're purely paying on consumption, whereas Flow is sort of consumption-based, but you have licensing as well, so it's a bit more lumpy about how you pay for it. But Azure Logic Apps is purely consumption-based, so it might be a better option for certain things.
So does it mean Flow uses the Azure Cognitive Service and then that should be linked together?
Yeah, all you're doing is there's a connector that sits in the middle. So whatever you're doing, you're just calling an API. Effectively, this is just a complicated way of, or a different way of calling an API. So you could write your own code, you would just download the libraries, you can make a REST call, however you like. It's easy enough to go and, after this you can go and see for yourself, but you literally are making calls against an API, it does the stuff. So instead of using a connector like I've used in Flow, you'd be making an API call or whatever, or using a library in the middle or something. It's very, very simple stuff.
User applications directly communicate with API.
Yeah, so you could write a user application, you could literally plug into these cognitive service APIs very, very trivially. That's the key takeaway from this is that you can easily add this machine learning type stuff to your existing applications and new applications without going out of your way. So if we look at the stuff behind here in terms of the flow, so I go back to my flows and I'm looking for one called moderation. And this one's got a bit more going on in here because I've actually got, but the guts of this is when an item gets posted, I initialize some variables, and it says detect profanity and match against a custom and shared blacklight dictionary or something. I'm not quite sure what it says. So effectively you're making, this is the bit that wraps up an API call. So I'm saying, here's my text screen for smart, it's English. Ah, that's the problem. I've set it to English. I should just set it for auto detect. That's why it failed to. What we could actually do, just for grins, because I love failing in demos, is I will make that automatically detect language and we'll see if we can recognize Italian swearing. Anybody fancy that, just to see that there is no smoke and mirrors?
Yes.
To see me squirm? So this is the bit that makes the calls, and I'm telling it what to look for. I'm saying, look for PII, here's a list of my custom swear words, and yes, you need to cluster. So has it got auto there? I can't actually remember without Googling this, but if I put...
You've got to do an action to detect the language.
You have, haven't you?
Yeah, before this.
Yeah, what I'll try, just for the sake of brevity, is I will try Italian as the language here, and we'll try the swear word again and just hope it works. But you could do something to detect language. I thought it could do auto, actually. I'm not quite sure. Never thought of doing this, you see. Obviously, this is me going off the piste a little bit.
Quiet, so what would it do without anything?
Shall we see? It's not compulsory, so... No, language to e.g. English, because I guess you might have collisions, mightn't you? You might have a word that's perfectly legitimate in English, and in Maltese it's the rudest word ever. So you might actually say, no, only swear check in English, because I don't want to know that in the remote Himalayan regions of Nepal, this is a terrible thing to say about your mother-in-law. We don't actually care. So let's just go with that. So I'm going to say save.
Or it might use English as default.
It might. This is how we learn, isn't it? Or not? Sorry, don't probably can't. So, can we have some swearing again, please? Would you like to? Can you come forth and give me some Italian swear words?
Still in this space buffer, maybe?
I want to see him.
What's the different one?
Have some. Think. Come on, we've got to have some words here, foreign words that are. I used to know. Oh, I know that one actually.
I know what I'm thinking about.
I've hung around Italians enough to know that one.
Italian swear words aren't the same without the hand movements.
So we'll wait for this to get added to the list. And so it's been added to the list. We'll give it a moment to see whether it thinks. Oh, there we go. So it has been left to figure out the language. It's figured out that you said something very rude in Italian. There we go. So it does work after all. Well, I learned something every day. I knew that it could detect swearing in 100 different languages. We've proven it works in at least 2 languages. So any questions so far about swearing?
I don't know the meaning of the word.
Everybody's furiously Googling, what is this? What is this?
Can you combine the two?
Yeah, because this is more an adjective, like, and the other one is a go.
Okay. So you could go for a double whammy there. I mean, maybe you could have some sort of sentiment analysis on that, couldn't you? And count the number of swear words and say, this customer is Italian and they're really, really unhappy. Treat with caution. Okay, so moving along from there, we're going to have...
Can I just ask you, where would you go to get, is it the Azure portal?
Yeah. Well, we'll go and take a look at the Azure portal in a moment if you want, because obviously you guys are much more interested in that part of it than the fact that I've just wired it up there. We'll take a look at the moment. We've got time to play with, haven't we? So we can take a look. We could do that now if you wanted to, and then lastly we can see whether we can get my machine learning, my custom model to actually work. It didn't work yesterday, it worked this morning, so it's a bit dicey. We'll have to see. Anybody, should we take a look at the Azure portal? Right, without further ado, I'm going to try and move my mouse onto the, I'm going to start a new. This is where you hear me swear in other languages. Right, you will see in the various things there, you can see cognitive services. So basically, recent resources, I've got cognitive services, and there it is really. And we can see what sort of pricing we've run up. Now, there's actually a pretty decent documentation on there. There's a little API tester as well. So, you know, you guys could go back there this evening and start playing with this stuff. It's in the portal. It's just I happen to have used, I happen to have wrapped it up inside of Office 365 because it's just an easy way to consume it. But you never need to touch any of this flow stuff. You can keep it all inside the Azure portal if you want to. The APIs are really easy to understand. There's an API test tool, which is what I did there to add my custom swearing stuff. So it's pretty easy to use. And the prices, you can see there's, well, obviously you can't see from back there because you're miles back, but you can see lots and lots of stuff here. Should we have a look at billing? I wonder how much we've... Demo, what have I cost? Is that a quid or something like that?
56 quid is on top.
That's not that one. So it looks like I've run up £1 or that £1.67 of costing. So I think that's all right. That was a couple of demos and some tests. So, you know, even allowing for that sort of stuff, it's not stupidly expensive. So, any questions so far? So it's in the portal. You just fire up a resource. It's just a resource there. What we can do, and you can see all the pricing tiers, that basically it's consumption based, just like everything in Azure. The more you use, the more you pay, but as you go higher levels, you pay less per call. That's more or less the model they use. And like a good crack cocaine dealer, they give away the first level for free just to get you hooked. So as is often the case with Microsoft, isn't it? The freemium model of here's enough to get you playing with it and get addicted to it, and promise this to loads of people, and then as soon as you start to get some severe consumption, then it starts to cost you. Any questions? Okay, what we're going to do now is, this isn't part of my normal talk, this is something I've tagged on the end because I felt like I wanted to have a go at this stuff. There is something within Cognitive Services called custom vision, and that is what I was talking about earlier, where you can give it lots of images of things and you can categorize them. So you can tell whether something's a cup or a saucer. That all seemed like a bit too much hard work for me, so I never actually got around to making it demoable. Now what happened is those good folks in Microsoft decided in the world of Power Apps that they decide to expose this same custom learning, this custom stuff, the custom machine learning stuff is exposed in Power Apps now, so there's a much more simple approach. So you can build a model, you can train a model on stuff, and then you can actually call this, and you can keep it all simple. So we're going to take a look at the various components of that, and then lastly, we're going to see if it works. Now, my particular challenge I set myself is I have two cats. One cat is ginger and fat and very, very greedy, and the other cat I have is tabby and slim. I decided that what would actually be really fun is if I pointed a camera at the cat balls and set up a motion detector, could I count how many times each cat was eating? So I'd want to know, is the fat one fat because he basically eats all the food, and is the slim one slim because she never gets to eat? Now I never got as far as that, but what I decided to do is build the model that I would build to use that. So what I did is I took about 200 pictures of my cats. I need to get a life, I really do. I took 200 pictures of my cats, and then I fed it into the model. I built myself a model, and what I did is I uploaded all these images, and I said, this one's Paddy, this one's Lola, this one's Paddy, draw a box around Paddy, draw a box around Lola. That is pretty tedious, I can tell you. But I got it done. Now, Microsoft tell you that for each entity you're trying to recognize, you need to have at least 50 images for it to work. I found with about 70 of each, it worked reasonably well. If you think about it, a cat is actually a really hard thing to detect, because if you look at a cup or a saucer, you can look at this from multiple different angles, but fundamentally this hasn't changed its shape, has it? Fundamentally, if you look at it from this angle, whereas a cat, depending what the cat is doing, whether the cat is lying down asleep, in a lengthways position or curled up in a ball, the cat looks really quite different. So cats are actually quite a tricky challenge for machine learning to identify one from the other. So I tried to take as many different pictures as possible of the cats on as many different surfaces as possible, as many different poses as possible, to try and build up a good model. Obviously, you're just telling it what is in that model. It doesn't know that the background isn't part of the cat. So effectively, it'll try and work out the delta between each image and work out what's common to all of those images that tag the same. The algorithm will try and learn on that basis. So if you're training a model, you need to think of as many different varieties of different background on those things, because otherwise the model will start thinking that the background that you picture the item in front of is part of the same. There's a real knack to training models. It's hard, but it's tedious. But it works quite well. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this part of it. So we're going to have a look at the model part. So I have built myself inside of Power Apps. I've basically, anybody here use CRM? CRM uses Common Data Model. Effectively, these are entities in Common Data Model. I've built myself a cat ID entity, and I've populated it. I don't know if you can read from there. There's 2 objects in there, one for each cat, and there is 154 images. And it's telling me that I have 98% confidence on my ability to recognize things. I have no idea where it gets that number from, but that sounds a good number. That sounds a confident sort of number, doesn't it? Now, I've actually wired this up to a Power App to recognize one from the other, but in the interest of brevity, what I actually can do is there's a quick test here, and we can just drag an image in and see how it does, because you don't really care about the fact that you can wire this up and make this do things. I'm just going to drag something into the model to test it. Is that all right? We can have a look at the code behind later, but we just want to see where this works. So I'll show you a little bit about how the model works. So what you do is you build a model, and then you train it, and then you can do a test on it, and you can publish a model. You can actually create a new model. So I can say from the last trained version, you can see lots and lots of pictures of cats, and we could add some extra pictures of cats if we could be bothered. But
did you say you manually tagged 154 images?
Of cats, yes. I have a thrilling life. What can I say? Living the dream, living the dream. And also you guys can laugh at me. So you can see here I've created a model here that's got Lola and Paddy, and I'll say next. And it's saying these are all the images that are ready, and I can actually upload some more images, and I think what it's going to show me here is these are all the images that have been tagged, and you can see an almost mind-numbingly large amount of cats. I can actually drag some more pictures in there if I could be bothered. In fact, you can see a couple of pictures here that I've decided not to tag because I decided that those images weren't representative, but what I could do, showing you how this works, how tedious this is, I've clicked on this image of the cat licking its cat bits. And what I would do is I basically have to draw a box around the cat, and I say, this is Lola or Paddy. What a way to spend an evening, eh? You could binge watch an interesting series on Netflix, or you could just sit there tagging pictures of cats licking their behind. I mean, what choice do you have in life? So you can see that you build a model. It's not particularly difficult. It's a fairly decent user interface, but it is really tedious. And you need to think carefully about the sort of images you've got. So imagine for a moment that you've decided you've tagged all your cat pictures, and you're ready to tell this thing to go get them. So I'm just going to hit back a few times, which may not work as well as I thought, but I'm just going to try and back out of this. So we've tagged all our images. We're not going to train the model, we're just going to use the model we've got. So I'm going to say quick test here. So I should be able to drag an image into here, and I'm really struggling with the hand-to-eye coordination when the mouse is upside down. Hopefully I've got some pictures of it. Do you know what? I need to be facing this way. I just can't do it. Excuse me for a moment. This isn't going to work either, is it? Oh, it's on the other screen. Oh dear. Right, I'm going to try and drag this over. So what I'm going to do is I actually have a real picture of my cat, and I'm going to see if I can drag this in there. And last night when I did this, it fell over for some bizarre reason. At the moment,
this then?
This is Paddy. We'll see whether it says Paddy. Yeah, if you can see there, it's
So has
identified.
it seen this exact photo before? Is this part of the training set, or is this an independent?
It's not. You'll have to take my word for it. If we had more time, I could show you the date the model was last changed and show you that this photo was taken afterwards. You can see that it has actually guessed Paddy, which isn't bad, is it? We'll try another one with Lola.
Why does it put a box around? Is that the area that it's recognised?
Yeah, basically saying that's what it
hasn't
recognises as paddiness.
Right.
In its machine learning autistic Rain Man world, it thinks that that is Paddy. It doesn't care about the rest. It says that's Paddy. But remember, cats are difficult.
What's that percentage there? Is that
It's
confidence
saying
level?
its confidence level, which is saying 75% of Paddy. So I'm just going to start over, and I'm going to drag another image in. And I'm going to, here's another one of Paddy, and I will do one of Lola as well, just to demonstrate. So this definitely isn't in my model.
Are you sure?
Yeah, it could all be a cheat. So interesting enough, it
Not
said,
really sure.
well, it's actually found Paddy twice, but it has actually identified the cat, hasn't it? I mean, the fact it's identified things that are Paddy twice. It has no idea what a cat is, you remember. This thing doesn't know what a cat is. It's just saying, there are things I can see that make me think of an entity that you have called Paddy. That's what it's doing. You're saying, well, that's not two cats.
Is this UI? Is this all in the portal?
Yeah. Oh, this is actually in the Power Apps area, so you don't get that in Azure. But underneath, you can access the same stuff.
Is this AI Builder?
This is AI Builder, which is still in preview at the moment.
And can you expose that then as an API so you might use it on the website or something like that?
I believe you can. At the moment, it's all trapped inside of, there's connectors, so you could actually use it with logic apps. So it has connectors. I'm not sure how you'd call it from outside of there. And within Cognitive Services itself, it has an AI builder, but it doesn't have this nice user interface. It's a lot harder. You have to basically build your own user interface, import all these things into the model. The nice thing about this is it captures all the various parts you need together, gives you a user interface, so it's a much better way of testing it. So if you want to see whether you can actually usefully use this stuff to solve a problem, this is a great way to prototype. And you might then decide that you're actually going to build it in a proper way, but this is just to see whether it's even worth it. Because when I set off on this, I had no idea whether it could tell cats apart. This was an experiment. I wasn't going to sit there and write a whole load of code to do this. That's tedious. It was tedious enough just tagging the cats. So we're going to try with one more cat, and then we're going to try and mess it up, because we're mean to computers. So here we go. Here is the other cat. You'll notice most of the pictures of the cat sleeping, because it's much easier to take a picture of a cat that's sleeping than of a cat that's running around the house.
This is Murphy. Oh, no.
This is Lola, and it says 61% chance of it being Lola. That's not bad, is it? So in terms of being able to tell one cat from the other, it's done a fairly good job. Now, obviously the next question is, what happens if we decide to put a picture of something that is neither of those two cats in there? So I have prepared some pictures of things that aren't cats. This is actually Amy's cat, so we'll see what it thinks of that. And it thinks it's Lola. So obviously, if Amy's cat decided to wander all the way from where Amy's cat lives and came to our house, it would be counted by my AI cat counter as being my cat. So obviously, it's not a perfect system, although it would be quite a feat of catdom to actually do that. And
but it is actually set up to say, it's not trying to decide whether it's one or the other.
it is. In this case, it's saying which of these two entities it is. Now, so in terms of
in the end, it does decide on one. It doesn't say, well, it's none of them or what.
It could say, if you give it a picture of, say, a picture of Boris Johnson, it would, goodness knows what would happen actually, but it would say it is neither of those two things. It is not Paddy, it is not Lola. Or it might say, I think it's 0.1% chance of it being Paddy. So what we can try, actually, is, here's a picture of a cat sitting in a flower pot. Now you'll notice that the cat is actually very similar to Paddy, and it's decided it is Paddy. So it's decided that despite the fact it isn't my cat, it thinks it's my cat. So you can see that I've trained it for a very particular task. And the task of telling one cat from the other, it's actually pretty good. But when it comes down to, is this something else pretending to be my cat, it hasn't actually done a great deal. It hasn't done a particularly good job, has it? It can be fooled. That's, I think, the lesson we're learning for this, is it's good for telling one thing from another, but if you introduce false, it will give you false positives if you introduce other data. So this is why at the moment you might not want to drive a car using the image recognition in here, but you might want to tell what sort of car it is. Unless we have to try Grumpy Cat, don't we? Just to see. And it thinks it's Paddy, but it only says 33%. So if you set yourself a criteria saying, I'm only going to accept the recommendation if it's over 50%, it would have probably screened that out as being Paddy. Any questions about this so far?
I've just got a colleague called Rob who's watching it live stream, and he's sending me questions just because he's got a cold and he couldn't be here today. Basically, you've asked him, you've given it, the world only exists of these two things.
Yes.
And it's saying, here's an image. Which one of the two things is it? And it's either yes it is or it's not.
Well, actually, it gives you a percentage. It gives you a likelihood of it being either of those two things. So, for example, I've got an image somewhere, I'll try and dig it out, of both of those cats, and it'll actually correctly identify both of those cats. So what it's trying to say is, does the image contain either of the two training sets of data? Now, I could have 10 different types of cat in there if I wanted to, or I could have a dog in there. At that point, you're going to get pretty random results. But if you were trying to tell, say, widgets that a customer has, on their shelves, it would actually do a pretty good job. But it does get confused by false positives. So if we just give it something else.
I guess the follow-on question is there like a world where it understands 100 million different things, and you can send it and it go, yes, this is a cat called Lola? Is it?
Probably not, but if you were prepared to train that model, you probably could. I mean, obviously Microsoft have done this on a huge scale. You remember we showed you the general image recognition, not the custom stuff, and they'll have trained these models on thousands of pictures of balloons, thousands of pictures of pineapples, babies, all of those sort of things, so it's recognized that. So they've obviously trained these models there. This is a custom version, so we're saying we're only going to train it on just these things, just to tell the difference. Because the telling one thing from another is actually quite a commercially useful thing to do, isn't it? If you think about having an application, stock control application or something running on a phone, you just literally pick your phone up, say, oh, what's that sitting on the shelf? Boom, identify, and it'll tell you that, oh, it's a widget A, 96A revision 2. It's potentially quite useful, and it would probably get a fairly good guess at that. I've heard of people using it for cases of identifying parts in machines where the parts aren't necessarily well labelled. If you think about a field engineer.
I think I've seen it with Lego.
Yeah.
Help you identify what Lego parts look like.
Lego would be a good one, actually. I mean, Lego would probably be much easier than cats as well. When I chose cats, I was deliberately trying to pick a hard question to see how well it did on a real difficult thing, not an easy one like Lego. Although it would actually be pretty tedious taking thousands and thousands of pictures of Lego. It's one of those jobs you probably wouldn't want to go. So if I gave it a picture of both cats, for example, it's actually got it bang on there. It said Paddy and Lola, and that was actually when they were kittens, so it doesn't do a bad job. I'm quite impressed with it, but you can obviously see its limitations, can't you? It's not 100%, but...
I bet that if you had like 1,000 pictures of each cat, it would be a lot better.
Yeah.
Pick out one, if you could get every single possible option of the cat with hair up, hair down, it's going to get better, surely.
Yeah, and the other thing is, say you were trying to tell a focus from a cursor, and a focus from a cursor, it'll come in different colours, but they'll have certain design elements. That would be an interesting one to do if you could be bothered to sit there and feed it thousands and thousands of pictures. Or maybe you could screen scrape eBay, couldn't you, and get loads and loads of pictures of a car. So you'd have a system that would identify what model of car it was from a picture. You have to think quite carefully about how you train these things, because you can end up with some strange results. So, for example, if you train it with CCTV, and the CCTV camera is always pointing in a particular direction, it'll start to recognize things in the background as being part of the object you're recognizing. So it's by no means foolproof. You have to think about how you train the model. I'm sure it'll be one of the occupations of data scientists and things will be to think about how to train an AI model in how to get good recognition. Any other questions?
Any positive reinforcement of this? Like, it's identified this from a random new picture. Can you just say, yes, you're right?
Not in the Mickey Mouse version we've got here, but I believe in the proper cognitive services stuff, you can train the model with your data and keep feeding it and refining it. This, remember, is the cut-down version.
Life a bit less tedious.
Yeah. This is the cut-down version, which I think for the purposes of demo, it's great because it's simple, it gets your attention and things like that. But if you wanted to make something that was commercial, that you were making a important decision on, you'd probably want to retrain the model and stuff like this. Where I was talking last night, there was somebody who worked in wound care, and they said they had an image archive of 15,000 pictures of wounds, which doesn't sound all that nice, but he reckons that you could train it with all those wound data and get it to recognise what sort of wound it was, which is a fairly disgusting thing to sit there. Think about sitting there all evening recognising wounds. So that's even worse than cat pictures. But if you gave it a big enough set of data, you could actually start to get things like that out of. You have to remember, this is the simplified version, which is trying to give you quick results with minimal amounts of data, rather than being an industrial strength version. And this might be good enough for some cases. Any questions?
On the same disgusting level, I think I read somewhere that there are teams for to identify prohibited content on Facebook.
Yeah.
And so they're forced to watch videos and images that causing them also kind of trouble.
Yeah, and one of the things.
So AI could help with that.
Yeah, one of the things you can do with the moderation service is it has the ability to recognise inappropriate content. So somebody would have had to train those models, but the nice thing is, as that model's been there, then that model can do the work for you next time to save the humans. Because I've heard people that have that job of sitting there watching, screening content. It drives you mad because you stare into the abyss, and after a while the abyss starts to stare back at you, doesn't it? It's not a job I would take in a hurry. It's far worse than the wound care database. Any other questions?
This is what the role is for the data scientists if they do that. So we got a big chunk of data. When you say the model, we train it.
Mm-hmm.
So what the data scientist role to do that, create a model, is it for them the role to identify what images for what?
I guess it would be a division of data science, isn't it? Or it would be a skill to have, is to train a model. We're talking about how this thing isn't necessarily going to destroy your jobs, but in some ways it might create new jobs, and some of those would be to be a data scientist who knows how to train a model. If you're somebody who's good at training models, I dare say there would be some good, well-paid consultancy work for you, because once you've trained a model, it can eliminate humans from a lot of things, can't it? It can sift through vast amounts of images. Just remember, this stuff, if you're prepared to pay for it, could be looking at video in real time. So this could be sitting here looking for something that it could be monitoring a CCTV camera for something. It can do some fantastic things. Obviously not at the level of this demo, but if you extrapolate from this.
So I think one of the Microsoft demos I've seen is it's for building site, and it recognises the person, and then it recognises what the equipment they pick up, and it says then authorised for that equipment.
Yeah.
That type of stuff. So
yeah, there's some amazing applications of it. So, any other questions? I was actually going to show you OCR last, but to be honest, this is more exciting than OCR, and we've seen OCR of images. It's not a big deal. My experience is if you give OCR a picture, a piece of A4 page that you've scanned in nicely, it does a bloody good job. If you give it random photos you've taken on the street, you can sometimes get some strange and hilarious results. That's pretty much the précis of that part of the demo. So I don't think there's any need to go into that part of the demo, because I'm aware of the time now, and I've overrun, haven't I? Completely overrun. But I thought I had the
Let's go
time.
around the pub.
Yes, let's go.
Yes. Okay, any other questions? Got one question for you. Where do you think we'll be in 5 years' time with this stuff? What will somebody be like me showing you?
Well, I keep hearing reports of developers' jobs disappearing due to AI, but frankly, I can't see anything like that happening. Not even in the next 10 years.
How does it take the developer's role?
Does coding instead of the developer? Yeah, exactly. The main part of my job is understanding what human beings really meant.
You can. It's interesting to watch what China is doing, for example, because they've obviously taken on
social goals
to another level, really.
Yeah.
So I think if you want to have a glance in the future, maybe
Yeah.
look at China.
Yeah. In other words, think about what could you do if you were evil with this and you didn't have GDPR? What potential have you got? And that's an experiment that other countries are trying, aren't they? So we're quote unquote hamstrung by GDPR. Thank goodness.
Well, there was a podcast, I think it was Scott Hanselman or .NET Rocks, and they had a guy on talking about that, and he was saying that they're using it for spotting terrorists in football stadiums and stuff like that.
So it's,
Yeah, you could use it for passenger screening and things like that, because you would, beyond this, if you start looking about, this is in analysing a static image, say you analyse a video stream and you would determine that people that were shoplifters, for example, had certain characteristics. They'd look furtive, wouldn't they, and things like that, and they might keep, do various things, but the obvious things are what you think a shoplifter does versus the things that shoplifters may unintentionally give away certain body language and certain behaviours. They may act in a certain way. And if you could analyse a stream of video from a shop and you would say, this person here is acting like a shoplifter, and you immediately start to draw attention to that. There's some really scary things you can do with that.
I've heard stories of them using it for counselling sessions. So instead of a human, you're talking to a computer, but it's doing cognitive recognition of your facial expression, your heart rate, figure out if you're under stress or not stressed.
Yeah. It's really quite interesting. I sometimes think about where we'd be from 5 years' time, where we'd be in 10 years' time, because what you can see here, 5 years ago, this stuff was, it was invented still, but it was sort of stuff that was in a research lab. Now you can literally string this stuff together in demos you create over lunch, and feed it data you do in an evening. That's the difference, that this is suddenly accessible to somebody like me who's doing this in their spare time for fun. Whereas prior to that, 5 years ago, that would have been the realm of data scientists and people who had a huge team. I didn't spend a lot of time on building these demos, and it shows. But but these are not things that I've invested huge amounts of time getting right. These are fairly easy things to do. These are low-hanging fruit. If you think what you can do if you invest some serious time in them, it's really quite amazing what you think you could do.
Does anybody use Google Photos?
Yeah.
It tags it along. My nephew's the identical twin boys, 6 years old. It tags it to from the birthday, from the child until now it just recognizes all the pictures and just tag it as one name. That's really shocking, because the face looks completely different from the day one and the age of 5. But it had Google Photos recognize everything. Even the identical twins, it's able to recognize them.
Yeah, and so in some ways, we're talking about the Rain Man analogy, that in some ways it's got superpowers beyond what we can do. Even though it's stupid in some places, it's amazingly smart at doing certain things, isn't it? It's an amazing time we live in, because this stuff's commoditized now and it's cheap, so you can actually bring this into your applications and solutions tomorrow. That stuff, it's that accessible. It's not something that's coming in the future. This is stuff you could use tomorrow. Well, tomorrow's Saturday. Monday, Monday for those of us in the real world, you can start using this next week, which is a difference. It's very accessible now. Anyone? I'm preventing you going from the pub, aren't I? So sit down and shut the up. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Talk about open banking. They've moved a lot of stuff to Azure Functions. Sounds really, really interesting. So I'm looking forward to that one. And it's on a Thursday again. Last Thursday. We're going down to Brewery Tap to have a drink and continue chatting about cognitive services.